As Agnes has said, I'm going to give maybe a 30 or 40-minute presentation on, first of all, a little bit on the Irish dairy industry and the background of where we are and where we hope to go in the next couple of years, and then talk about the system of production in Ireland, and then I'm going to go through kind of the whole reason we're here, the actual principles of how we manage grass in Ireland and the 3 stages of the year that we manage grass. So you probably understand or don't understand, I'm speaking English, I don't speak Dutch. If there's a problem, put up your hand and we'll get Agnes to translate.
I think everybody
Okay, so I will try and speak as slowly as possible, but if no one understands, put up your hand. So just a little bit on Ireland. Some of you might be familiar with this. This is a map of Ireland. So the Dairy Research Centre that I'm involved in is based in Cork, in southern Ireland. The dairy industry in Ireland is very much situated in the southern of Ireland, the bottom half of Ireland, because of the soil type and the climate that we have. So this is the best region. Although we're quite small, there's a huge variation in the soil type and growing conditions across the year. In Ireland, there's about an average herd size of about 70 cows per farm, and about 17,000 farms across the country. So there's about 1.2 or 1.3 million cows in the country. That ranges from about 30 cows to 700 cows of a minimum and a maximum. So the largest herd in Ireland is about 700 cows. The main cow type we have is a Holstein Friesian cow. It's a cow that probably produces 5,500 to 6,000 litres of milk per cow per year. We're a spring calving herd, so 95% of our cows calve in the spring period in Ireland, so in February, March and April. So we have a 3-month calving period, and all of our 95% of our cows calving that 3-month calving period. 90% of what we produce in Ireland is exported, so we are very, very self-sufficient in dairy products, and 90% of what we produce within Ireland is exported. A lot of that goes to the UK, and China is a new big market for us as well. So that's worth about €3 billion in exports in 2013. That was worth to the Irish economy. So it's a huge aspect of the Irish economy, and it's going to get bigger going forward. So in 1984, before milk quotas were introduced, Ireland were producing 5.5 billion litres of milk. In 2014, Ireland were producing 5.5 billion litres of milk production. So we could not increase at all. Pre-1984, Ireland was the fastest growing milk production country in the world. And in 1984, when milk quotas came in, similar to here, we were capped. And in 2014, we still produced the exact same amount of milk as we did in 1984. When milk quotas were removed last year, Ireland have been preparing for this for the last 3 or 4 years, so there's a lot of extra cows on the ground. So in 2015, Ireland produced 6.3 billion litres. So the year that quotas were removed, we increased 0.8 of or 800 million litres milk in 12 months. Where we expect to go in the next couple of years, so in 1980, when milk quotas came in, you can see where we were at the very left-hand side of the graph, the 5 billion litres. In 2012, we were very similar. New Zealand was a similar milk production to us in 1984. However, in 2012, they had produced 19 billion litres of milk. So the Irish government, with the removal of quotas, have set a target for the Irish dairy industry to increase milk production by 50% by 2020. Now, you'll hear a lot of different countries getting very worried about Ireland increasing milk production by 50%. 50% sounds like a huge amount, but it's 50% of 5.5 billion litres. So on a context of in New Zealand, where that will be by 2020, it's still nowhere near New Zealand. So if we reach our target of 7.7 billion litres by 2020, which we will reach and we will exceed it, we're still going to be nowhere near the bigger producing countries like New Zealand. And if you put America in there, Ireland or New Zealand combined and doubled still wouldn't match match America. So it's very important for us, but on a global scale, our 50% increase is quite small. So that's just a small background to the Irish dairy industry. This is who I work for. So I work for Teagasc. Teagasc is a state organisation. It's the Irish Agriculture and Food Development Authority. So Teagasc is located across the country, and you can see there's three main roles that Teagasc have as an organisation. So advice, so that is knowledge transfer from the research to the farmer. Education, so like yourselves, Teagasc have 6 second or third level colleges across the country, and also research. So I'm involved in the research side of things, and most of my work, our presentation today, is going to focus on the research that has gone on in Moorpark on grazing management and the guidelines and the tools that we have developed to bring these to farmers. And in the workshops, I think we'll actually probably go more into the knowledge transfer and how they work on farm principles. So the objective of the research programme within Teagasc and within Moorpark, so the Moorpark is a dairy research centre, it's to develop a pasture-based dairy systems that are profitable, environmentally sustainable, and an attractive career opportunity for young people. So we can produce this 50% extra milk. It's very, very simple, but we have to produce it in a way that is economically and environmentally sustainable for Irish farmers. And the best way to do that is through grazed grass. So all of our increased milk production has to come from grazed grass. We are self-sufficient in grazed grass, but we have to import all of our concentrate and feed because we don't grow enough cereals and barley to produce enough concentrate. So every bit of concentrate that we have to feed to the cows has to be imported from another country, and it's a huge expense for us. So the main areas of the research programme are dairy cows, grass, technology, so new technologies, robotic milking, new technologies, automatic grass and measurement, environment. But the main topic that I'm going to talk about today is grass. So the rest of the talk is just going to be focused on grass. So this graph is, the figures might be slightly outdated. So on the left-hand side of this axis, we have the cost of production for every 1 litre of milk produced on your farm. And on the bottom axis is the amount of grazed grass that's included in the diet of those cows. So you can see Ireland are sitting here around 70% of the total diet of the cow comes from grazed grass. Now that's not silage and forage, that's grazed grass, so the cow's actually grazing it themselves. So we're hoping to increase this to 80 to 85% in the next number of years. So as well as increasing production, we're trying to increase the proportion of grass. So that increase in production will be coming from grass production. So what that means for Ireland and the typical Irish farmer getting 70% grass in the diet means we can produce milk for about 20 to 22 cents per litre. We can grow grass very, very cheap in Ireland. We get quite a long growing season, about 260 to 270 days that we can grow grass across the year. But we can also graze this grass for 250 days of the year as well, which is very important for us. So by increasing the proportion of grazed grass in the diet, it's one thing trying to do it, but what benefit will it be? So in Moorpark, a lot of work has gone on the development and the increase of utilisation of grazed grass in the diet. So for every 1 tonne that we can increase grass utilisation by grazing, not conserving silage, but by grazing the cow, we can increase our net profit by €161 per hectare. So if we have a 100-hectare farm, that's huge. So that's why we are so much focused on grass in Ireland. We can grow a lot of it, we can utilise it, but it's also economically and environmentally sustainable for the Irish production system to be able to do this. So the objective in Moorpark, and the objective that Teagasc has set for the dairy farmers across the country, is to increase dry matter utilisation to 13 tonne per hectare. So that's a utilisation of 13 tonne. That's probably a figure of 85 to 90% utilisation. So we're talking about growing a total amount of grass about 14.5 tonne to 15 tonne per hectare. So that's growing over probably it's 12 months of the year, but most of our grass is growing over 9 or 10 months of the year. So it's a big target, but it's achievable. In Moorpark over the last 6 years that I have been there, we have achieved this and surpassed it on some years. So it is achievable, but there's certain tools that we have developed to help farmers achieve this target. So just grassland in Ireland, so there's 4.6 million hectares of utilised agricultural land in Ireland. 80% of that is under permanent grassland. Of that 80%, 25% of that is under dairying. So there's still a huge scope for the Irish dairy industry to increase the amount of ground and cow numbers that we have in the country, and that's why we're very confident that we'll be able to increase our milk production by 50%, because we have all this extra land that has been underutilised by other enterprises that can come into the dairy enterprise. Current herbage production is quite low nationally. This is including beef, sheep and dairy farms. It's about 9 tonne total grown in the year, and we're utilising about 7.5 tonne per hectare. So that's across all 3 grazing enterprises, so dairy, beef and sheep. If you look at the dairy centre, some of the best dairy farmers, yes? Yes, so herbage is grass grown. Is that okay? So the amount of grass that we can grow on every hectare of ground in it, and that is 9 tonne dry matter. Do you all understand? Sorry, I should have clarified language and before I did the presentation. Is that okay? 9 tonne? Yeah, 9,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare. And we're utilising about 7,500 kilos of that 9 tonne dry matter. It is okay, but for us to increase our production, we need to achieve that 13,000 kilos of dry matter utilised per hectare. And the proportion of grazed grass is about 70% in the diet, and we're hoping to increase that to 85% of grazed grass in the diet. So the system of milk production in Ireland, I've already touched it. So Ireland is a spring calving dairy production system. We have 95% of all of the cows in Ireland calve during the spring, with the remaining 5% calving in the autumn. So they are winter milker herds, so they would be more typical of the kind of system that you would see here. So they're kept inside for most and fed concentrate silage and maize. Pardon?
Don't talk too fast.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. I'm Irish, we speak very fast. So we calve our cows, start to calve our cows at the beginning of February. As soon as our cows are calved and the ground conditions allow, we try and get our cows out to graze grass as soon as possible. So generally we will have the first number of cows calved, and by the second week or the first, depending on what region you are in Ireland and the ground conditions, we generally have cows out to graze grass by the 10th of February. Most years. Now, some years it will be a week earlier and some years it will be a few days later, but generally we're talking the 7th to the 10th of February by the time we can get our cows out to graze grass. They will remain out on grazed grass until the end of November or the first week in December. When they are no longer producing milk, they are then dried off and put into a stall barn accommodation and fed just silage with no milk production. So that is kind of the way we do it. Across the year then we have to manage our grass in different ways, and that's what I'm going to talk about in a bit. But because we're a spring calving herd, our cows are housed indoors for generally 2.5 to 3.5 months of the year, depending on what region you are. And while they're indoors, they are fed just silage, no concentrate, no maize, just silage that we make from that grass that we've grown on our farm. So in total, a typical Irish cow will eat approximately 5,500 kilos of dry matter in the year. And a typical Irish farmer will probably feed between 500 and 800 kilos of concentrate per cow per year. So the remaining 4.8 tonne or 5 tonne of forage consumed or herbage consumed is from grazed grass and silage that's fed to the cows during the winter that is made from that silage or grass that we didn't graze. Okay? So most farmers will ask how many cows are you going to milk? The main question we have to ask our farmers is how much grass can you grow? The amount of grass that we can grow on our farm is completely dictates, or that will tell us how many cows we can carry per hectare of ground that we have. So if our farm is only producing 10 tonne of forage or grass grown in the year, we cannot carry 3 or 4 cows per hectare, because we already know we need 5 tonne of forage for each cow. If we're carrying 3 cows per hectare, we need 15 tonne of feed, or 15,000 kilos of feed. So if we're only growing 10,000 kilos of grass on our farm, we can only carry 2 cows for every hectare that we have. So that's the most important question that we need to ask our dairy farmers going forward. How much grass can you grow? And that will then dictate how much cows you can carry, and you match your cow demand to your grass supply. Okay? So this is kind of the grass growing season in Ireland. So you can see that the southern half of the country on the graph on the left hand side, so the 11, the 12, 13 and the 14, that is the amount of grass grown per hectare in tonnes. So 11 tonne in the northern half of the country because they get a lot more rainfall, and then in the southern half of the country we can grow 14, 15 and 16 tonne of dry matter per hectare. And that's generally averaged over a 250 to 300 day growing season in the year. So we grow grass for 9 and 10 months of the year. So I just have 3 different production systems up here on Ireland, and this is the last slide I have then on the Irish dairy industry before I go on to grass. So current average milk production is 370 kilos of milk solids per cow. So we no longer talk about milk yield, we are now paid on milk solids. So on that 370, it's probably a 5,000 to 5,500 litres produced per cow. Our national stocking rate is quite low at 1.9 nationally, which means we're only producing about 700 kilos of milk solids for every hectare that we have on our farm. The mean calving date, so that's when half the cows are calved in the country, is currently the 14th of March. And we're feeding about 800 to 900 kilos of concentrate per cow. The top 10%, so some of the better farms in the country, are producing 400 kilos of milk solids per cow, nearly 900 kilos of milk solids per hectare. Their mean calving date is much earlier on the 5th of March. Their stocking rate is slightly higher and they're feeding less concentrate and they're growing more grass. The top 10% are quite good, but they're still not as good as we need to be, or the target. So this is the target that Ireland have, and this is where we want to be going forward for the next 5, 10 and the rest of the dairy production in Ireland. So we have a target of 470 kilos of milk solids per cow, a stocking rate of 2.8 cows per hectare. That would equate to 1,300 kilos of milk solids sold for every 1 hectare of ground that we own. And a mean calving date, so we want to calve our cows earlier in the year so we can get a longer milking production season. So we want to have half of our cows calved by Valentine's Day or the 14th of February. And obviously grow or utilise 13 tonne of forage. So the main question that we have, what stocking rate will continue to deliver the reasonable profits for the Irish dairy industry? And that's going to be dictated by the amount of grass that we can grow. So the amount of grass that we can grow, so that is the kind of introduction to the Irish dairy industry. If you have any questions on that, we can take them now before I go on to grass. If not, we'll continue. We'll continue.
We can take the questions later on in the workshop as well. So.
Okay, so within Moore Park and Teagasc have developed grazing guidelines for the Irish dairy farmers to help them achieve this 13 tonne utilised and 15 tonne grown, and help the farmers increase their stocking rate to 2.8 cows per hectare. So the main thing Ireland has a very good advantage over some other countries is we have a temperate climate and a very, very long grass growing season. So we can achieve 300 days plus grass growing season in certain parts of the country. All of the production systems in Ireland are generally on grazed grass. They will have different systems, will have different levels of concentrate fed, but the majority of all meat and milk production in Ireland is from grazed grass. So we have a long grazing season, so from February to November the cows are grazing outside, and they're only brought back inside to the shed when it is extremely wet and they're doing too much damage to the pasture. Other than that, always outside for 24 hours a day. The only times that they come in is for milking. So this is a general grass growth curve for Ireland. So you can see here at both sides of the year. So we're here in the spring, in January and February. The green line is how much grass we grow in the year. So you can see in the spring, because it's quite cold and wet and the day length is quite short, we grow a very little amount of grass. So this is the amount of grass grown each day on our farm. As the year continues and we come into February, March, April, May and June, when we get our peak grass growth, this is where we peak, and then it falls off, steadily falls off as we come towards the end of the year, back into winter again when grass growth ceases or gets very, very small. So the reason we calve our cows in February is to match this grass growth supply. So the green line is how we how much grass we grow every day on our farm. The blue line is our herd demand. So this is how much grass we need to grow to feed the cows every day of the year. So although we do calve our cows in February, we're still not growing enough grass in February to meet the herd demand. So this is when we feed, out of that 500 and 600 and 700 kilos of concentrate, 3/4 of that concentrate is fed during this spring period here, when the cows are just after calving. So this is when the main period that we feed the concentrate, because we have a deficit. So we have a deficit at both shoals of the year when we aren't growing enough grass to meet the herd demand. So we don't grow enough grass every day to feed every cow on our farm. So these are times of the year that we need to supplement the cows with concentrate and silage. But then here, when we are in this time of year, we have too much grass. So this is when we make our silage, that we can conserve the silage to feed to the cows during the 3 months of the year that they are no longer producing milk. So we don't have to feed our cow produces milk for 9 or 10 months of the year, but we have to feed the cow for 12 months of the year. So this is when we get the surplus grass and we have too much grass. This is when we conserve that silage, or that grass as silage, to feed to the cows during a time of deficit. So what we have to do is we have to manage our grass at different stages in the year to meet this demand. So what our Teagasc have done is divided the grass growing season up into 3 periods. So we have our spring, we have this period here. We have our summer, when we're generally growing too much grass for our herd demand. And then we have the autumn period again, when our grass growth is falling off. So we have 3 time stages: spring, summer and autumn. So the importance, so the way we do this and the way we manage our grass every day of the year is we measure how much grass, or manage the grass that we have on our farm on a weekly basis, to see how much we have to feed our cows. So it's a little more difficult than a typical system that is housed indoors, that you can go to the silage pit or the maize pit and the meal silo and put as much into it as you want to feed the cows. We have to grow the grass every day to feed the cows. So we need to manage it and know how much grass we have, because it's continually changing across the year. So the main aspects, or the 3 most critical points in terms of grassland management, is to ensure that you have an adequate grass supply every day of the year that the cow is producing milk and grazing grass, and also have enough grass to feed the cows when she is housed indoors and she's not producing milk anymore. Ensure that that grass, that we don't just have enough of it, that is of a very, very high quality to meet the cow energy requirements. And also during that time when we don't have enough grass in spring and autumn, to ensure that we do have as much grass as possible, that we can feed as little concentrate and as much grass as possible. So the way we do this is we measure our grass every week. Generally done, most farms will walk their farm every Monday morning. They will walk every paddock on their farm, measure the amount of grass that's in each paddock, and then they will know how much grass or forage they have available to feed the cows for the next 7 days. So the 3 methods that generally we use in Ireland, and I think we're going to see them in the workshops this afternoon, is the plate meter, cut and weigh, so that's the quadrant here. And most farmers, when they are measuring grass for a long period of time, they become very confident and they no longer need a tool. They're good enough to look at the pasture with their eye and see that there is X or Y amount of grass available on that pasture. So that's generally the 3 methods that we have for measuring grass on our farm. So although we start calving our cows in spring, and that is the start of the year, the actual grass production year begins in autumn. And I know that might make a huge amount of sense, but it will in a minute when I explain it. So what you do in the autumn, because we generally don't grow grass over the winter period, what you do in the autumn period with your farm will dictate how much grass you have available to the cows the following spring. So if we graze a paddock on Christmas Day, we won't have any grass on that paddock in February. If we graze all our farm in December, we will have no grass on our farm in February, because generally we don't grow grass over the winter period because it's too cold and too wet. So that's why we start to manage our grass in autumn, and that will dictate to us, or tell us, or help us have enough grass for the cows the following spring. So what we've done for that, or what Teagasc have done for that, is develop this, what's called Autumn Grazing Management Tools and Autumn Grazing Management Programme. So it's called the 60-40 rule. So what that means is we graze 60% of our farm between a certain date, and we graze 40% of our farm between a certain date. So generally in Ireland, we have no more cows on our pasture from the first week of December on, because it's too wet, and the cows have already had a 300-day milk production season, so the cows aren't producing much milk anymore. So we generally cease milk production in the start of December. So, but what happens before that in terms of the grass is very important for us the following spring. So what we do is, from every paddock that we graze from the 10th of October, now we have the 10th of October there, but it will slightly vary depending on the region that you are. It might be 3 or 4 days either side of the 10th of October. But generally it's in and around the 10th of October. So every paddock that we graze from the 10th of October onwards is no longer grazed until the following spring. Okay?
Michael, question. You say mass below 2,500 kilograms.
Yes.
Do you measure from 0.0?
Yes. So
not from 5 centimeters?
No, so we measure grass. So yeah, that's probably, I should have said that at the beginning. And there's a huge confusion all over the world in what you measure your grass to. And I think Ireland are probably the only ones that do it different to everyone else. We measure our grass. When we measure how much grass we have on our pasture or in our paddock, we measure it from 3.5 centimeters up. So we generally graze, when we graze our pasture, we generally graze it to between 3.5 and 4 centimeters of a post-grazing sward height. So in Ireland, we don't see the point in measuring anything below 3.5 centimeters because we'll never graze it. So all of the pasture that we measure is always from 3.5 centimeters up. In the Netherlands, I think it's 0. 5 centimeters. In New Zealand, it's 0. In the UK, it's 0. They measure to ground level. So in Ireland, what we would call 1,500 kilos of dry matter, the New Zealand farmers would call it 3,000 kilos of dry matter because they measure it to 0, we measure it to 3.5. So what we call 0 of herbage mass, New Zealand will call it 1,500, and the UK will call it 1,500, and you would call 5 centimeters 0. So we would call your 0, we would call it about 350 kilos.
So those 2,500 kilograms, how many centimeters is that?
So that's, you're probably talking about in the autumn period, because you're trying to extend the rotation, it's probably above ground level, so from 0 to 10 centimeters. So it's probably in the range of 10 centimeters total grass from the ground. So if you're talking available, it's probably 6 centimeters, 6 to 7 centimeters available for the cows to graze. So when we measure grass, we only measure grass what is available for our cows. So below 4 centimeters or below 3.5 centimeters in Ireland is not available to the cows because it'll never be grazed. Is that, sorry, I should have clarified that at the beginning. I never know which country you're in, what they measure to. There should be one, and everyone should do the same thing, but maybe one day. So yeah, so that's why we have maintained a pre-grazing herbage mass there in the autumn, and it's different for different times of the year. But in the autumn, why we have 2,500 kilos of dry matter, because we're not growing much grass. If you go back to the graph, we're in a deficit, we're not growing enough grass, so we're trying to extend our rotation. And the best way to extend your rotation is to graze a slightly higher herbage mass when you're trying to extend your rotation. So that's why we have 2,500 kilos above 3.5 centimeters. So you would call that here, I don't know what you'd call it here, it's yeah. So that is what we would call that. So when we say 10 centimeters, it's 10 centimeters compressed sward height, and we'll talk about that in the workshops, I think, this evening with the plate meters. So generally from the 10th of October, once we have our paddock grazed, it's no longer grazed until the following spring. And the reason that is, so it will have between a 70 or 80 day period from once it's grazed until it's grazed again over the winter period. And we're growing very little grass over the winter, so it has 60 to 80 days to get enough grass back on it, so we have enough grass on the farm the following spring. So that's why we say once it's grazed on the 10th of October, it's no longer grazed, because we need a sufficient regrowth interval between the two grazings to have enough grass back on it when the cows go back out to the pasture again to graze the grass. So the reason we have 60-40, so from the 10th of October to the 7th of November, we want to have 60% of our farm grazed. So if you have a 100 hectare farm, you need 60 hectares grazed over that 3-week period from the 10th of October to the 7th of November. So you have 60% of your farm grazed. That means you will have 60% of your farm that will have on average about a 45 to 50 day regrowth period by the time it's grazed the following spring. And it hopefully, depending on, unless you get a very, very, very poor winter, you will have enough grass on the pasture to somewhat reduce the level of supplement that we need to feed the cows in the spring. So then from the 7th of November to the 1st of December, generally when all our cows are housed, we have the remaining 40% of our farm to graze. And that's why it's called 60-40. So you graze 60% in the first 3 weeks, and in the last 3 weeks you graze 40%. So we're grazing a smaller area in the same time frame. So the way we do that is we fill the gap with silage and meal. So we're grazing 60% of a 100 hectare farm. That's 1 hectare or 2 hectares a day over the 30 days. And then for the remaining 25 to 30 days, we have 40%, so we have 40 hectares to graze. So it's probably 1.1 or 1.2 hectares a day that we need to graze, or it depends on the size of the farm or the size of the milking platform that you have available to you. But by doing this and meeting these targets, it will help us to ensure that most of our farm will have a level of grass that is sufficient to somewhat meet the energy requirements and the intake requirements of the cows the following spring when we begin to calve our cows again. So is everyone clear on that before we move on to the spring? Yeah? So the reason we have the guidelines is just so we have the regrowth interval. If we grazed everything on 1 week, every paddock would be the exact same. But by spreading it over 2 months, we have every paddock at a different level of herbage mass, and then when we come the following spring, we can graze those paddocks in sequence. Okay? So then when we come to spring, so I'm going to go through, we have another spring rotation planner, and I think Agnes has this link. I think I gave it to her when she was in Ireland earlier on in the year, that she can send on to you, and you can go in and look at this planner and actually the mechanics of how it works as well if you want to. But because if you look back to the graph, we're not growing enough grass in the spring period, but we have the grass available on our farm that we have carried over from the autumn period. So we have a certain amount of grass available to the cows, but we won't have enough to feed the cows 100% grass. So the best way we do it is, the best way to manage your grass in the spring is to graze a set area each day. Now that is dictated by when you turn the cows out, how many cows you have, and the size of your milking platform. So the tool that we use for this is called the Spring Rotation Planner, and I'll go through that again in a little more detail. So this is the program that we use, and there's 3 or 4 different principles that you need to put in for your farm. So that is the turnout date, so the date that you turn your cows out. So it's generally in Ireland between the 5th and the 14th of February. The weekly calving pattern. So we calve our cows over 12 weeks in spring. So by scanning the cows and knowing the insemination dates of the cows, we will generally know how many cows we have calving each week on our farm. So our cow numbers are increasing each week in the spring. So that also goes into it. The grazing area, so the amount of hectares that you have available on your grazing platform, and the date that you want to finish your first rotation. So generally in Ireland, the first rotation is about 55 to 60 days. So if we start grazing on the 5th of February, it's generally the 5th to the 7th of April by the time we end our first rotation. And if you go back to this here, the reason we have picked that first week in April, it's the date when we are growing enough grass to meet the herd requirement of our farm. So that's what we call Magic Day. There's different deadlines or different names on it in different regions of the world. I can't remember I don't know what you call it here, but it's the date that we are now growing enough grass to feed all of our cows on our farm 100% grass. So that's generally the date that we target to end our first rotation. Okay? So what we do here, the Spring Rotation Planner, you can have this link, Agnes has it, you can send it out to the rest of you. But what we do here, so I have a Spring Rotation Planner here done. So we have, this is done for the Moor Park farm now, which is very, very dry, so they can turn out cows a little earlier than the rest of the country. So we start to graze on the 1st of February. Generally, we'll only have a very small proportion of cows grazed, so we're grazing a very small area of our farm because we'll only have, depending on number of cows, but generally less than 20 cows grazing. So that is the date that we start grazing. So over the first 28 days of the grazing season, or 20 to 28 days, depending on when you turn your cows out. So by the 1st of March, we want to have 30% of our farm grazed on our overall farm. So if you have a 100-hectare farm, that's 1/3. So you're grazing 1/3 of your farm over the first 30 days, or 1 hectare a day, for example. But that will increase depending as cow numbers increase as well. So the target is important at the end of March, or the start of March. So from then the 1st of March to the 17th of March, so the next 17 days, we have a lot more cows calved. As I said, we have a medium calving date nationally of the first week in March. So we have over 50% of our cows calved at this stage, and their intake is increasing. So we can graze the next 1/3 of our farm much quicker than we did the first 1/3. So by the 17th of March, we want 2/3 of our farm grazed. And then from the 17th of March to the 5th or the 7th of April, we will have 100% of our farm grazed on the thing. And on that date then, this is the date that we start our second rotation, or when we have met our herbage demand has met our cow demand. So the reason we do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is grass growth is still quite low in the spring. So we have all this grass on our paddocks that we've carried over from the previous autumn, so we know how much grass we have available to the cows. We still all have that grass available, but we need to start grazing the first paddock that we graze here. The first paddock that we graze here, we need to graze it again on the 8th of April. So we need to ensure that that paddock has enough grass grown back on it on the 8th of April so we can feed our cows all grass. So that's why we have a certain first rotation length of 55 to 65 days again, so it's 60 days to get back to the pre-grazing herbage mass that we require for the cows. And generally in the start of the second rotation, we have a target pre-grazing herbage mass of about 14 to 1500 kilos of dry matter above 3.5 centimeters. Okay, so that's the principles of how you do it. This is the spring. So again, it's very, very simple. You allocate a certain area per cow or for the herd every day on your farm. We'll know, because we're measuring our grass every week, so we know how much grass is available in that paddock. We know how much cows are going into that paddock, so we know how much grass is available to each cow within that paddock. If a cow is eating 12 kilos and there's only 7 kilos available within that area, the remaining 5 kilos is made up of concentrate and silage. So although she mightn't get 100% of our intake from grazed grass, we ensure that she'll get as much as possible, and the deficit of what the cow wants and what the cow is available is made up of concentrate and silage. Is that okay? Yeah? You understand the Irishman? Yes?
How much nitrogen do you give to the fields then?
So in Ireland, I think it's the same here. So our nitrogen application season is 9 months. So we're allowed to apply chemical fertilizer from the 15th of February to the 15th of September. So generally by the start of the second rotation, so on the first week of April, we will generally have applied 80 units of nitrogen per acre. So it's quite a lot. So we'll have nearly over 1/4 of our, between 1/4 and 1/3 of our nitrogen applied in the first 3 months of the year.
Why don't you split it?
So that will be split over, so we'll go out in January and we'll spread the entire farm in January. When we have, then in the first week of March, the first 30 to 40% of our farm that has been grazed will get more nitrogen, and then the remaining 60% that has to be grazed at the end of, or the remaining third that is grazed by St. Patrick's Day, or the 17th of March, that will then get nitrogen, and then at the end of the first rotation, the remaining 1/3 will get nitrogen.
So you would give about 40, 50 kilograms per time?
Yeah, so about 30 to 40 kilos over 2 applications. So one all over the farm, and then the second application is divided into 3 depending on the area that you have grazed. Okay? So in Ireland we apply a maximum of 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Per hectare, yeah. So once we start the second rotation, then we go into the main grazing season. This then continues on until you start your autumn rotation plan again, so your 60-40 the following October. So from April until the end of September, we use what's called the mid-season grazing management, and this is when we measure our grass every week. The difference between the autumn and the spring rotation planner compared to the mid-season grazing is the autumn and the spring is worked out on a set area per day for both of the seasons. For the main grazing season, it's dictated by the amount of grass that we have available on our farm and the cows, how much grass the cows are eating. So what we do from the mid-April to August and September is we have a target pre-grazing herbage mass of between 14 and 1600 kilos above 3.5 centimetres, and we graze our swards to between 3.5 and 4 centimetres. So the cows go in at possibly 8 to 9 centimetres compressed sward height, and we remove the cows at 4 centimetres. By grazing to 4 centimetres, it ensures that we remove all of the herbage that's on the paddock. We'll achieve very close to 90 to 95% herbage utilisation. That's very important for the cows because there's no point in wasting grass either. And by grazing to 4 centimetres, you ensure that the next rotation, so the grass that grows back in the next rotation, is of very, very high quality. So if we leave it at a much higher post-grazing sward height or a higher residual, with the next rotation there's a lot more fibre and stem in the pasture and the quality is reduced. So by grazing to 4 centimetres, you maintain very good quality in the pasture at all times. So every week then we will walk our farm, we will measure the amount of grass that we have available on each paddock in our farm, and then we can decide what paddocks we need to graze for the next 7 days. We will only graze the paddocks that have the target pre-grazing herbage mass. If a paddock is above the pre-grazing herbage mass, we will remove it as silage, and if it is below it, we won't graze it until it is fit to graze at the target pre-grazing herbage mass. Okay? So we have here, it's called here the grass wedge, and again there's another link here, and I think Agnes has that from when she was in Ireland as well, so she can send it out. It's called the Grazing Notebook, and it has the principles of the wedge in it, and I'll go through the principles of the wedge. So every week, and it's generally a Monday or a Tuesday, most farmers will do it because it's the beginning of the week, they will walk their farm, record how much grass is available in each farm. They will then put it into an Excel program or a computer program, or draw it on a manual piece of paper. So they'll have each paddock and the amount of grass available in each paddock. And what you should get from the highest to lowest is generally what looks something like a wedge. Now, I might get Agnes to explain a wedge because this often causes... Okay. I was talking to a group before and I was talking about a wedge, and I was talking about something to keep a door open. So it's a grass wedge. It's a similar shape, but it's completely different. So we will then use this wedge. So from the highest paddock to the lowest paddock, we can see how much grass is available very simply on a visual basis, how much grass is available. If it's above the 1400 kilos, it's too strong to graze, there's too much grass in it, and it's very difficult to graze it down to the 4 centimetres. And if it is much lower, below the 1400 kilos, the cow won't get enough intake from the pasture. So we create a profile. We have a target line then submerged, so we know where we want every paddock to be in the 21-day rotation. So I don't know if I said it there. So what we'll do generally from mid-August to mid-April, because we're growing a huge amount of grass at this time of the year, similar to you are here, we can grow that 1400 kilos between 18 and 21 days. So every 18 to 21 days we will graze each of our paddocks on our farm, or remove some of the paddocks that are too strong and make them as silage. Okay, so this is what a wedge should look like. So the red line is the target that where we want every paddock to be sitting. So you can see here every paddock is perfect. This never happens. Okay, never when you walk every paddock on your farm will this happen, because grass, it's very difficult to manage. You cannot control the weather. The weather dictates how much grass is grown each week on your farm. You cannot control that. So what happens in the week is really up to God. So you just need to measure to see what's available. This is what we want. We need to manipulate the paddocks on our farm to get this every week. So this is where we want to be every week. What we need to do to get this every week is then dictated by how much grass we have on our farm. So this is a deficit. So you can see here we have a big hole that obviously it was a very poor week. We didn't grow enough grass. We now see that only only 2 paddocks are meeting the line where we should be. So this paddock and this paddock. But everything in between is much below the demand line. So that's how much grass we need to feed the cows. So what you need to do here, what we call this is a deficit. We don't have enough grass to feed the cows. So what we do here is we need to manipulate the wedge to reduce this red line by reducing the amount of grazed grass the cow receives and increasing the amount of supplement in silage or concentrate to reduce this line so we can get it back looking something like this. So we have a hole, we need to fill that. We don't have enough grass to feed the cows. We need to fill that hole with silage and concentrate to get it looking like this. Then you can get the opposite when all the paddocks are above the line, and then you have too much grass. So you can see this paddock here is 2,200 kilos of dry matter. It's much too strong to graze. It's very difficult to get it down to the 4 centimeters. There's a huge, the proportion of fiber in the pasture is increasing and the quality is decreasing. So you can see here so we have a target here. So this screen is very sensitive. So you can see the first 2 to 3 paddocks, the first 2 paddocks have too much grass on them. So we need to remove those as silage. Every one of these will move over here. This line then will be perfect for our red. This paddock will be perfect for our red paddock, and so on and so forth. And then you will get it looking like this when we remove those paddocks as surplus silage. So we make round bale silage or a silage pit that you do here as well. So that's how to deal with a deficit and a surplus to get your wedge looking like this. So you always have to manipulate your paddocks every week and how you manage your grass every week to get your wedge looking like this. So that's really all I have. That's the kind of a summary. You can read it yourself, but it's just kind of the 3 main seasons that we have to go through is the autumn 60-40. That dictates how much grass we have available on our spring. The spring rotation planner ensures that we can get maximum amount of grass into our cows every day for the spring period, and then managing our grass during the main season using our wedge and making sure that we have enough high quality grass to feed our cows every day of the grazing season and reduce the amount of concentrate that we have to feed. So that's all I have to say in the presentation. I don't know if you want to do questions now or...
That is great. Questions will be done in the workshops, but I think